what I have in my vise here is my front end loader caddis, and this is a pattern I came up with at the World Championships back in 2013 in Norway, where I needed a caddis dry that could float a dropper because we were fishing a lot of dry droppers at range, but the fish there were pretty willing to come and eat dry flies, but the dry fly needed to be flush because we were fishing a lot of flat water, and they just didn't want high riding, buoyant dry flies. So one of the patterns that I've liked a lot for slightly rougher water when mayfly fishing was the hackle stacker caddis, or sorry, the hackle stacker mayfly, which is sort of the front of the front end loader is a hackle stacker configuration. And it was inspired by that mayfly, but combined with an elk hair caddis wing, because the hackle stacker allows this fly to float flush, but the combination of that with the elk hair wing really helps it to be buoyant as well. And I caught a lot of fish, a lot of brown trout on this in Norway, and it became a really important staple of my box ever since. It's a really good dry fly pattern, both to convince fish to eat on it on its own, but also to hold up a nymph. So I'm going to put a size 14 light wire scud hook in the vise here, and you can do this on just a straight dry fly as well, but I like the protrusion that you get from the curved hook of the back end of this fly going underwater. And I've got some 8/0 rusty done uni thread here, and I'm just gonna cover the shank full of thread and then come back up about 2/3, 3/4 of the way up. And now I have 3 strands of Glow Bright floss, and I believe this is number 7. This is a fluorescent orange. You could do number 5. You could do any number of colors. A lot of people have said, well, why do you put an orange on a caddis? Don't you know they're supposed to be a green? But because of the egg sac, well, guess what? It's a hot spot. It's not really supposed to be an imitative egg sac, and I tend to favor pink or orange hot spots. I've never really done as well with chartreuse hot spots on flies, so that's what I have on here. But by all means, put a chartreuse one on here and see how it works for you, and I'm sure it would still catch fish. Okay, so I've tied that down, and you notice that I clipped it quite short. I really only need a little bit of a tag there. That's not supposed to be a big giant tail. It's supposed to just be more of a trigger when it comes to the back end of the fly. Okay, now I'm going to make a dubbing loop here. So I've taken and wrapped it around my thumb, and I'm lifting it up and making a dubbing loop. It's out of the frame here, and I'm just going to wrap that towards the back of this fly. The dubbing loop is not to have dubbing loop put in it. You'll see what it's for here in a second. And then I have some pearl sulky tinsel here that I'm just going to tie in. Now the dubbing loop I tied in and wrapped back to the hook on the far side of the shank, the side of the shank away from me. And this sulky tinsel, I'm putting it and wrapping it back on the near side towards me. And that is a little bit important if you want to get the tension right when you're looking at the way those two are going to be wrapped. Okay, now I have some tan superfine dubbing, and I'm just going to dub a little bit of that onto the thread here. And superfine is particularly difficult to get off the thread if you put too much on, because it really likes to stick to it. So add a little bit first and see if that covers the shank for you. And if it doesn't, you can always add more. Looks like I'm gonna need to add a little bit more, but that's okay. I'd rather add more of this stuff and pick it off, because it is a pain to pick off. And you can build a little bit of a taper here, but it's not necessary to build, a lot. Okay, now I don't want to put any dubbing further forward than that, because I need quite a bit of space up here for the wing. The easiest thing to get wrong on this fly is to crowd that head with too much wing, so give yourself lots of space. Now I'm going to wrap this sulky tinsel, so if I'm looking at the front of the hook, let's say I put my head out here to the side and I'm looking at the front of the hook, this wrap is going to go counterclockwise. So because it was on the near side of the hook toward me, then it actually goes under the hook first. And I put all of my first wraps of any ribbing material under the hook first because it tends to protect that material from the teeth of the fish. If you put it over the top of the back first, then it's close to the back of the hook, and that exposes it to fish's teeth where they can kind of cut it and shred it off the back. I find it just is more durable if I make that first wrap underneath the hook. Even if it's not fish's teeth, it can still slide off the back of the hook pretty easily if it's on top. Okay, so now I have my Stonfo dubbing twister here, which is by far my favorite because you can turn it like that and wrap. It cocks to the side, and it's a really easy tool to use. It's not the cheapest dubbing twister by any means, but it really is good. So I insert that into the loop, and I'm going to twist it up nice and tight here all the way until the thread is almost touching the tool where it's spun. And then I just, like I said before, I cock this to the side here, and then I can use that to just wrap. And this is going to go the opposite direction of that sulky tinsel. So it's counter ribbing it, which adds to the durability. So if I'm looking at the front of the hook, then I'm wrapping that ribbing or the thread ribbing as or in the clockwise fashion. Okay, now I'm going to make a thread change here. So I had 8/0 uni that I tied the back of the fly with. I'm going to switch to some 18/0 Semperfli thread here. This is brick beige, and this Semperfli thread is really expensive, and it comes only on a 30-yard spool. So if I can avoid using it any more than I have to, then I will. But for certain tasks, it's really helpful. So it is a gel spun thread, which is exceptionally strong. You cannot break this. It's 18/0, it's ridiculously small, but you cannot break it. You can crank on this hook all you want and it's not gonna break. And that makes it great for tying in hair wings. So I've just got some elk hair here, and I'm gonna cut off a little bunch. You can experiment with how much you want to cut off here. If you cut off a ton, you can see kind of how much I have there. If you cut off a ton, you'll make a nice buoyant fly with a lot of wing, but it's then easier to crowd the front of the fly, and the fly itself might not fish as well, or might turn some fish off if you have too much wing. But I play a lot with the amount of wing just to increase or decrease the buoyancy. And if I know that I'm going to be holding up a fair amount of weight, then I make the wing fairly bulbous and thick. Okay, I've just stuck it in a hook stacker here. And I'm going to give it a whole bunch of whacks. And now, before I tie that wing in, I should have done this while the thread or the hair was still in the stacker, but oh well. I'm going to take and apply some super glue. So that's Loctite, brushable, that I've just applied some on. That's going to keep this wing durable, but also keep it from spinning. So then I'm measuring it. I want that wing about the length that it's even with the back of that orange tag. And I do a full 2 wraps around before I put any tension, and then lock it down. And then I'm going to put a whole bunch of wraps near the back of this here. I don't want to go towards the eye of the fly much because that anchors down that hair toward the eye, and it makes it easy to crowd the eye of the fly. But by not putting any thread wraps up there, I can get in there and trim out the base of those fibers a little bit closer to the eye of the fly, and it leaves me more space there. So try and trim this all off flush. You may have to be kind of careful. It's pretty easy to cut your thread if you're not being careful about where you put your scissors in there, because that thread is close to the surface of that hair, of the hair. And if you go too far into those fibers with your scissors, then you can cut that thread. Okay, so now I have the wing tied in and most of the trimming done that I need. Here we go. Okay, after I've got my wing tied in, I now need to put in a little bit of an indicator post so that I can see this fly really easily. It also adds a little bit of flotation. So I have some pink hairline parapost here, and this is about half a strand. So you'll cut it off in a strand and then just kind of remove about half the fibers. And I'm going to tie this down and then fold back the portion, the waist end that was facing forward, and actually tie that down again. So you end up with about the same width as a full strand of this, but it ends up being tied down in a way that's a lot more secure than if you just tied a strand in with the ends of it hanging out. That's going to lock the way I just tied it in locks it down really well, and it's not going to come out. Okay, now I have some flexi floss here, or some sexy floss, life flex, lots of different terms for this, spanflex or spandex type rubber leg. Okay, and I cut one of these strands in half, so they start out at about 7 or 8 inches, and I cut it in half and just paired up the tips. And the tips are going to get tied down right here. And I used to use tippet for this portion, but I found that it's more durable and easier to work with the spandex floss than the tippet is. And now I have a size 12 hackle here. It came from a Whiting 100 pack that was a size 12, but this is a size 14 hook. And so I tend to like to oversize the hackle by about a size on this pattern because it helps with the buoyancy, and I actually think it fishes better to have the fibers splayed out all over off the front looking like it's going to be draggled. So definitely don't hesitate to put in hackle that looks a little larger than it should. And now I'm just gonna, after I've tied that in right at up to the base of the rubber leg there, I'm just gonna add a little more dubbing. So this is more tan superfine. And I'm gonna cover up the hackle and the hair at the front of the fly. Try and get it covered as much as I can. There's a little bit of deer hair or elk hair kind of poking through there, but if I do much more, it's gonna make a big giant front end and it might slide the hackle off. So I'm gonna leave it. And to make sure that that dubbing doesn't come off while I do the next step, I'm just gonna throw in a half hitch or a 1-turn whip finish there to hold it in place. And then I can take and I stick my finger inside the loop. This is my index finger on my right hand I'm sticking there. And then I wrap this hackle around that loop. And you'll see I'm putting the loop off the front of the fly while I do this. That makes it easier to wrap and keep it from grabbing the pink parapost. So I wrap out about the length of however long this head is, and then I wrap it back down on itself. Back towards the base of where I tied it in. And you want to keep tension with that finger the whole time while you're doing this. And you're going to put quite a few wraps in there. You can put less wraps if you want less hackle and you don't need as much buoyancy. But I'm holding up droppers with these a lot, so I like to have lots of hackle. And you can put this hackle back in if you have a material keeper on your vise for a rotary function, you can just leave it there, or you'll have to hold it if you don't. And then spit on your finger a little bit or get some water in a bowl and stroke those hackle fibers back so they're out of the way. Do a pinch wrap up here, so pinch that thread, go around one full turn, and then lift up. And then maybe do one more. And then have some light tension on it and pull up on that loop. And that will pull that hackle down. And then I'm going to fold those rubber legs back and wrap over the base of them so that it locks them in nice and tight. And if it doesn't want to get wrapped over, then I'll do a couple more wraps with it facing down. And come in and trim those. This is probably one of the parts you need to be really careful, because you want to trim those rubber legs without trimming the hackle fibers. So you couldn't see it on camera there, but I'm using the fingers on my left hand to really guide those scissors into place so that I don't cut something I don't want. Okay, so now I just need to whip finish this, and before I do that, I'm going to add a little bit of super glue to the thread so this whip finish doesn't come out, because the thing about this dry fly is it's an exceptionally durable dry fly as far as dry flies go. You can use this same pattern, one pattern, for days and catch a lot of trout on it, but if that whip finish comes out in the front, well, you can kiss that fly goodbye, so you might as well do everything you can to keep that from happening. Okay. And this thread, being that it's GSP or gel spun thread, it is kind of tough on your scissors, so you may want to actually have an old pair of serrated scissors that will still cut it, but not damage your scissor at all. Okay, then the last step here is just to cut the remainder of the hackle out, and you have to be real careful once again. I don't actually swipe the scissor. I usually just stick my scissor points in here and surround the base of the feather and just kind of jab, and that will cut that fiber right off, but not, it'll cut the quill, but it won't cut the other fibers or the barbels from the hackle. And that is the finished hackle stacker. You can see it's nice and bushy up front and in the back. So, but it still floats flush. So there's no hackle on the bottom here. So it'll float flush with the surface, but it's got lots of fibers to help support it on the water if you need to hold up a dropper. And like I say, if you know that you're going to fish this pattern and not hold up a dropper, or hold up a light, unweighted, or just a 2 millimeter or 2.3 millimeter bead, then you could get away with dressing the wing and the hackle a lot more sparsely, and you might get a few more fish to come up and grab it. But otherwise, add more if you need more flotation. And I know that if you give this fly a try, it's a little bit tough to tie it first, but with some practice you can get it. And if you give it a try, you're going to catch a lot of fish on this. I've even had fish take it in the middle of the winter. I was fishing this a few weeks back in December, you know, long after any caddis hatchers were still around. And I had a day where I was fishing this in some flats and some glides and pools, and I had half a dozen fish come up and eat this on days when they were not rising for any other sort of item. So it's definitely worth the try. I hope you get out there and give it one on your local river.